Thank you for joining me today. And I think we've come together to record this, I say episode, but record this like amazing piece of content just for the importance of insight and feedback. And I know what you do and what I do, they collaborate quite nicely together, but there's so many missed opportunities with how businesses use insight to be able to find new opportunities for new business and to new markets, but also to develop existing clients and increase retention operations. I mean, there's so many benefits that I feel that aren't particularly understood that people should be aware of. So I know that that's why we've come together today. I didn't know if you wanted to jump in straight away, Alex, and just go into what do you guys do at Everything is User Experience?
Sure. Well, firstly, it's obviously great to be here with you, Bella. So I'm Alex Blondin. I'm the co-founder of an agency called Everything is User Experience. And the core of what we do is user research and UX strategy. Obviously, a lot of people think that UX is about websites, but it's not just about websites. It's about people and users and audiences. So we focus, the way we put it is that we help businesses align their strategy with the needs of all the stakeholders down the value chain. So it doesn't have to just be, obviously the customer and the customer experience is important, but it only works if you understand the needs, the wants and the pain points of all the stakeholders, be it internally or even your supply chain, etc. And so our role is to really do a deep dive, do a lot of deep research, conversations with all the stakeholders and help businesses realize that there is usually often quite a big gap between what they assume their customers want or even their staff want or need and what the customers or staff are actually saying that they need or want or what their pain points are. So that's our role.
I love that. And very similarly, it's using that insight and understanding what your clients want and need is kind of really jumps into what I do at Bella Hegg Digital, which is really helping businesses to be able to simplify, refine, and enhance their customer experience. Now, that doesn't just look at their customer experience, it looks at their service delivery and operations. So similarly, it's really understanding what their customers want and need, looking at their business goals and actually where they want to go with the business and making sure that the services that they're offering, the type of services that they're delivering, one, lead towards that, but actually they deliver a service that is beyond what their customers expect. And using that insight from, like yourselves, is all that stakeholder insight to be able to go, okay, where are the opportunities here? Where are the gaps here that we're not seeing to be able to make this more smooth to run, make it more profitable, but also provide an experience that is aligned and increases retention and opportunities for new business in itself, among other things. Why do you think this topic, especially on insight and research, is so important for businesses that you support?
Well, I mean, obviously, it's fundamental to what we do and who we are. I used to work for a branding and comms agency specialized in financial services. I used to work with big banks and investment houses. And I was at the time, head of digital. So it was obviously, very focused on the digital side, and you can't remove UX really from digital, although it's one of my missions in life to try and move that away from digital. But what we realized is that a lot of the work that we were doing was informed by internal assumptions and biases. They weren't going out and talking to their customers or even to their staff. They were just saying, I think this is the thing I'm supposed to do. I've heard someone else do it, so I think it's the right thing for us as well. But they don't even verify that information. So they go off, invest a lot of money in different things, be it a website, be it campaigns, even internal change within an organization, without even actually finding out if people want the stuff that they're doing. So to me, it's absolutely fundamental to any business. I actually believe it should be part of what every business does, is actually always having a conversation. And I'm sure we'll touch upon it later. It's not just about sending out a survey. It's actually talking, looking at people in the eyes and asking them, because they can give you so much. They are willing to help you. They want to help you, especially if they like you as a brand. And so they are absolutely willing to share their frustrations, but also give constructive feedback or even new ideas. So why wouldn't you go and look for insights and feedback from your clients and other people in your value chain?
Yeah, well, it's just sometimes seen as a cost, isn't it, really? But it's if we're not spending money on this, it's money down the drain.
Yeah.
That we're investing in marketing and activities, we're making changes to the business and the fundamentals of the structure of the business, and often they're the things that clients like most and teams enjoyed most. And you find that when you're making assumptions based off this, the frustrations start to bed in both from your side, because you're not attracting the clients that you like and that you want to work with. And ultimately that leads to a whole other amount of problems, because you're looking at huge chance of churn, scope creep, among many other things, but it causes problems down through the entire service, to potentially losing team members and clients and money because of that.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's if you're not actually even aware of who the right audiences are, or it's business as usual and you've always been working with this type of customer or this type of audience, and you don't actually look and check if it's the right one, you're probably missing out on a lot of opportunities. And as you say, probably some of the best clients that you could have, if only, again, you went to ask. Even if you went to your clients and say, are you right for us, or are we right for you?
Yeah.
It sounds like a really odd question to ask, but it might actually reveal some very interesting insights. And they might also say, well, yes, but, or you might find out that your client, you could even work with them in a better way, in a different way, that would make it much nicer also for your team to work on, and therefore improve everything across from the business strategy to the delivery of a great customer experience.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think there's often so many challenges that businesses come across. One of them is often around the implementation of it. It's like, we would love to do this. Like, it's a real nice to have, but we just don't have the time to be able to invest in in proper research around our clients. Like, we do a little bit of it and we do ask for feedback, but then we just haven't had time to use it yet. And that's often one of the biggest things that I see, is that sitting on that data, I mean, customers' needs, and to your point, they change on such a regular basis, that if we're not asking or finding time regularly to be able to put this research into effect, then we're missing out as their needs change, and we're using data that's then not relevant to what they're dealing with or what they need or what they're struggling with right now.
Yes. And I'd also add to that it's important to understand the context of that information and that data. I find that often, if you just go and look at one type of audience, again, I use the word audience because I like to think about different stakeholders, be it customers, staff, even a senior leadership team as well, at a minimum, if you're doing research and insights, is that you might be looking at something, and if you don't ask someone else about their perspective about this, you might be, again, adding a layer of bias or massive assumption on that, and therefore you're going again down the wrong rabbit hole with the insight. And then when it fails or it doesn't work, and people say, well, obviously that research was bad. It wasn't. It was just that it wasn't interpreted in the right way. So you really need to have a 360 view and understand from everyone's perspective, why are we doing this? What are the needs of our audiences? Are they even the right ones? And then often I find that a lot of that information, as you say, we're sitting on so much insight, because it's not just survey data or website analytics data. You've got client-facing staff who actually talk to customers on a regular basis, and it's amazing how many organizations don't really ask them in a deep and meaningful way what they think and why they think it's important. The word why, again, in research is much more important than just what. And if they did that, that would give them a much better understanding of what those insights mean and how they can be used to help to improve everything that you do. That what's really important, what you do, is that you go after us, we do the research, we present it, we call that the playbook, if you like, or the blueprints, but someone has to pick that up and interpret it and understand it. And that's where you can actually help turn it into real actionable strategy.
It is really interesting, because often that we get this entire list of feedback and we just don't know. I think the question is, what do I do with all of it? And there's so many things that can be done in the business. Like, I could do that, I could do this, I could do that. But then when it comes down to understanding what are the priorities based off the feedback that you get, and you're 100% right, you cannot just take client feedback to improve a business. I find this with so many clients that I work with, is what they think that they need to improve on is not what the clients think, and it's not what the team think, and it's not what the data's telling you. It actually starts with you as the business. Yes, we're looking for feedback, but development and optimizations, if we're looking to grow the business, if the founder's looking to actually eventually sell the business, you're actually looking to improve different things and you're looking for different insight than you would if you're looking to exponentially grow it.
Yes.
So, and still be a part of that. So I think it's really clear to know is like one, where you're looking to go and what you're looking to do with it. And then when it comes to actually implementing it, it's really key to break down the different, I should say, sections of that feedback as to, okay, where are they looking to improve? Like what different parts of the business did these kind of account for? And what's going to make the biggest difference right now is like for us, if we have a huge amount of projects coming up into the winter, we need to look at, okay, well, what are the small things that we can do that are going to, with our capacity that we've got, that we can make the biggest change with. Let's not start with the big projects that are going to take a lot of our time because we don't have the resource to be able to support with that. And that's where, and I love doing this part with clients, is like actually seeing, okay, how much can we actually get done over the next 3 months, 6 months, and 12 months by just actually putting a proper plan in place of how we can implement this. And then alongside that is like, what does success look like to that? Like, what are we measuring from these implementations or these changes actually within the business? And how can we make sure that we stay on track with that? And it just comes to proper planning.
Yeah. And I'd add to that also that what is key is focus. Because often, again, from talking just from the research and insights part, it's quite tempting to try and capture as much as you can. And that's very dangerous because actually you don't, then you've got that sort of overload of information that you don't know what to do with, because again, the organization maybe has never done this sort of exercise. So they want to capture as much as they can. But then they look at it all and go, well, what am I supposed to do with that? So obviously then again, that's where you and us can actually help them with that. But my advice is always to say, right, okay, you've got a project in mind, you want to achieve a certain goal. Let's focus the research on that. And again, what we do a lot of is a lot of qualitative research. So we actually talk to a lot of people one-to-one or in very small groups. And we get the answers to, obviously, because we're looking for them, we get the answers that we need for the project because we've already made assumptions, obviously, first, because you go out and do research to validate or invalidate your assumptions. You have to start somewhere and you have to be prepared to be actually wrong, which is quite normal. And so you go through, a set of questions that you want to ask. But what's really interesting with qualitative user research is that they give you other, what we call interesting things. And those actually do fall into a wider category that could be applied to other parts of the business or give you new ideas. But I still think there needs to be a massive amount of discipline in being focused and understanding that what we're doing right now is we have an objective, or we have a long-term objective that's been broken down into small objectives in the next 3 years. What can we do right now? Therefore, what is the research supposed to help us with right now, not in 3 years? We'll get to that eventually, but you have to start and be focused.
Yeah. When it comes to the developments and the improvements that a business can make, I mean, what does improvement look like? What does development look like?
I suppose it depends on what sort of project you're talking about. Let's use the typical example of a website. That's pretty easy. You go out, you know that you've got a certain amount of audiences. You've maybe hypothesized some new ones, so you go and talk to them and you find out what they need from the website, and suddenly it becomes much easier to develop user journeys that are actually tailored to the right audiences, that give them the right information that they want. That's, I suppose, is the most basic stuff. User research and UX strategy is actually then goes much deeper, and it actually applies to business strategy. I would even argue that it is business strategy. We have found, even with a website project for a membership organization that we did a couple of years back, they just thought that they wanted to understand their audiences better, how they were using the website. But obviously we went through a process of talking to the senior leadership team, the project team, and then talking to the users of the website. And what we found was that there were fundamental problems in the way that the internal processes were working, which meant that the digital team were having to respond to many different requests at the same time from different people who were quite senior. And the same thing was happening to their external agency as well. So they were just basically firefighting all the time. So the first recommendation that we made was create a website working group, change the dynamic, give the authority and the power to make decisions to the actual digital team who know what they're doing. And create a process, this is the sort of stuff that you do, obviously, which then helps them, the more senior leadership team representatives, to actually jump in, ask what they need and want, but let the digital team actually decide what is important. And that actually made the whole process much, much easier for then implementing the website, which was quite large with a huge amount of people visiting it and had lots of different types of audiences.
Yeah.
The real problem wasn't the website itself, it was the internal process.
Yeah.
So that is where success happens, where even just by doing that naturally creates lots and lots of successes afterwards.
Yeah.
Or you could look at also from a messaging perspective. We found that often when we're working on the value propositions or messaging, because that's also user experience, it often comes from the top and no one has been consulted, or they've sent out a survey or things like that, or they've spoken to their peers, and they sort of come down from their ivory tower and present to the whole team, lovely little diagram that shows all the values, give it to them. Well, people just go, that's really nice, put it in the drawer, and it never gets implemented.
Yeah.
So actually by going and doing the research, talking to people, the success there is that people actually feel, they feel like they have been part of the process. So suddenly they feel heard. When you come to the table with the new values or the new messaging, suddenly they recognize their tone of voice, they recognize even their words.
Yeah. And
the success there, or the improvement, is that everyone feels that they are part of the process. So therefore they are not causing blockers or saying, well, I'm not interested because I don't feel part of this. They feel like it's them. And so they're much more willing to help the organization move forward. And again, that has fundamental positive ramifications on everything else that they can possibly do. Again, it's not just the messaging. It happens in terms of the team, the culture of the organization. It has that impact as well.
Yeah, I mean, it also kind of, from a fundamental business perspective, it improves acquisition because everyone's communicating the same message versus, I love that insight. I mean, I often find that through customer interviews and team interviews, that how people are communicating are so different. It's so interesting. It was a client that I worked with, and he was so confident that what he was communicating was understood by his clients. They knew what they were about to go through. They knew what the service was. They knew what was expected of them. But in reality, they had no idea of what was going to happen post-sale. And most of the time, they actually didn't know what they were buying into because he hadn't articulated enough of the experience up front for them to actually buy into what's going to happen next. So then it often comes down to the client is less likely to get success. The team don't know what to communicate and when. And there was fundamental operational and communicational issues that happened because there was no clear understanding of what that experience actually was.
Yes.
And I think once you understand that, you have to find them from so many different avenues because when I spoke to the founder, he was so confident that his clients were happy. His clients knew what was expected of them. They knew what was upcoming. They knew what they needed to do to get results. In reality, the clients didn't feel like they had any of that because there's just such a misalignment in what's being said to the business often, because clients sometimes don't feel confident to say anything. Teams don't feel confident to say anything. But the teams also didn't know what they had to do to be able to improve it because they didn't have the skills or a process to say, okay, this is what we need to do next, or this is how I can step up into finding different areas. And I find that when we understand the customer experience in its entirety and actually physically map that out, and that's something that I love doing with clients, you can really identify what are the opportunities that we're missing so far, and what just don't we have in place. Because when you see that high level journey of how we're articulating something to a client, but then on another level is how are we actually delivering that internally, you can see what you're doing now compared to what you actually think that you're doing or you want to be doing.
Yeah. I'd also add to that often we don't necessarily know the answers or even know that there is a problem.
No.
So actually just doing a bit of a sanity check with customers or anyone else. I mean, we all understand fundamentally that, yes, you send out, again, I use the term survey just to find out if there is a problem. So we do sort of do it, but actually really, again, asking people, because sometimes you can ask them and they'll say, yeah, fine. Often talking about, for example, the types of questions you ask when you do research, a lot of organizations try and ask some very, very shallow questions. So they say, do you like our service? And you get a yes or a no. But actually what you need to ask for is the context. It's that why. and drill down into that, and maybe sometimes even ask the same question in a slightly different way 3 times throughout the conversation. Because the first time you ask them a question, they have a sort of, oh, I've been asked a question, maybe they're not sure, they just say the first thing that comes to their mind. Then you're having a conversation and suddenly they're thinking about it, and they come back and say, actually, thinking about what you said, I want to add more context and more depth to it. And that's where suddenly it reveals a lot of things that maybe you haven't realized. So they may say on the face of it that they're happy with your service. But actually, if you ask them a bit more, they might suddenly say, well, actually, yes, I'm happy with this part of the service, but there's a whole piece that's completely missing. And that could be a massive business opportunity for them to develop a whole new service that they haven't even thought about. And that often is missed because we just assume that our customers are happy, are content even, and we don't want to go and ask for more because, as we said, it's usually seen as a cost when actually it's a really, really quite valuable investment in the business.
A client I work with discovered tens of thousands that he, as an opportunity, that he actually then managed to close in retained business from an existing client who actually had no idea as what could come next and how that they could support with that. And if you think, if that's just from that retainer, like from an agency perspective, and working with a lot of agencies is like, what your retainers can be anywhere from 5k up to 100k a month minimum. I mean, they can go even beyond that. And it's looking at, okay, if we're identifying at least 60k a month in retained revenue, what does that do to our bottom line? That's huge. And it's just because we've not asked the right questions and identified those opportunities from just not asking our customers.
I would say that it's really important to accept that getting things wrong is part of the process.
100%. You
really have to, like, a lot of organizations tend to want people to be getting everything right the first time. But even just from a research perspective, an insights perspective, it might not be quite right the first time. And that's why, again, it can't just be a point in time. You can't just say, I'm going to do my research now, I'm going to do this massive thing, and that will do me for the next 20 years. As you were saying earlier, most of the customer needs, wants, and pain points change over time. And if you are still relying on years old data, even 12-month-old data, is probably wrong. So you have to be really careful and have to think again strategically how you make research and insight part of your, I would suppose, your business as usual, and have someone like you who can actually come and help have an external perspective and say, whoa, okay, let's look at this. There's some really interesting things here we could use. Maybe we should do a bit more research in that direction. It's not just a jump in, do as much as you can, try and get all the insights you can possibly think of. And then say, right, now we'll use that. It has to be much more organic, I think.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, when you work with different businesses, what's the perception of investigating and doing this research themselves versus getting you involved in it? Because I know when I speak to a lot of founders and business owners that I work with, is they don't ask because they're afraid of what's going to come back.
Well, every organization that we work with has tried, obviously, to do it themselves at some point. It's natural. We usually start working with organizations who've tried it and who've realized that it's not actually yielding the results. Or sometimes they just go, I just don't have the time. I don't even know how to start this process. So we need someone who's got an external perspective. And usually they've already gone through a journey of realization that this is not just put some questions in front of people and they'll give you the answers. There is a bit of an art to knowing how to engage with people, have a conversation, and know what to look for. Because again, it's about looking for those patterns. When I said earlier about the focus, if you just it's nice to have nice conversations with people like we're doing now. It's great. But at the end of the day, there has to be an objective and it has to deliver certain, KPIs, I suppose, in a sense, or objectives and key results. So it's true that a lot of the organizations we work with, they have tried this themselves first. They always want to because they see it as being easier. They know their customers. But often we start working with them when they've realized that that's not working. And they understand that they need to have someone or an organization who can go and ask questions that they probably wouldn't ask or wouldn't have thought to ask. So you're coming in from a perspective of, actually even for the interviewee, they feel more at ease because often a client doesn't want to tell the company or their agency that they're doing bad, especially if they're talking to their relationship manager.
Yeah.
So it's much easier to say it to someone else. Not that they're going to necessarily go and badmouth that person, but they can actually say things in a safer space. So it's really important, I think, to have that external perspective of people who actually know how to ask questions and what to look for, and again, have that focus. We've worked with quite a few impact startups, and so working with founders is especially interesting because they represent a type of founder that wants to know everything. And we found that when we worked with them, they had limited budget. So what we did is we helped them and we coached them in setting out the questionnaire and understanding who the audiences they wanted to test and go and talk to. But then when they got to actually having the conversations, they were just sidetracked with all the new ideas that they were just getting again and again. So you could see them taking more and more notes or going down different rabbit holes of the conversation and not staying focused. And again, the key is being focused and knowing what you're looking for. That's what helps then deliver for the founder, especially who needs to make pretty hardcore business decisions about the strategy and the direction of the business. Something that they can use. Otherwise, it's just too much, and it comes back again to that loop of you've got too much, you don't know what to do with it, you put it on the shelf, and you move on and you try something else. And why often I find that a lot of organizations end up saying, "Well, I just want the results." Like, surely, Bella, you already know all this stuff. You've done enough research. Just give me the best practice. And you know very well that that's not the case, because every business is quite unique. And you cannot just apply a one-size-fits-all to everything within the organization.
No, 100%. That's where I see a lot of these, like, let me give you my onboarding template for customer success. Well, that doesn't really work that way, because it really depends on who your ideal client is, the type of service that you've got, the different individuals and stakeholders within that business. So when we're looking at developments, I often speak to clients, and when I'm making implementation plans or conducting this, is when I map a customer journey on and looking at more an operational level or from that client journey, is like, how are we communicating this in multiple ways so that people can understand? So no matter who you've got and the different stakeholders that you've got, there's something that appeals to every single person. And if there's a real misalignment in you don't understand enough of what you want and your clients need, actually you could be giving them the wrong service or selling them the wrong product. And it's not just setting you up for issues later down the line, but it's also means that your client is going to become more frustrated because they're not getting the results that they're looking for. And that's a huge part of it, is at the end of the day, they come to you for a return on investment. Like, whatever it is that they're looking for, whether it's time, money, reach, awareness, generally it all comes back to the growth of their business or saving them time and money in their business. And that's generally what it comes back to. So if we're the facilitation of that process, if we can get more insights about what they want, what they need, and what they're struggling with, and how we can best support with that, it's not about us.
No.
But if we can get enough information about them, we can ensure that our service that we're delivering is so much more geared to actually what is going to give them those results, and we can generate those results a lot faster because we have that awareness and insight. And
also, I'd add that the clients actually feel much more heard because they're being asked what they think. And again, as you were saying, that if you're, as a client, you're getting the wrong service or not quite the right service and you're getting frustrated, naturally, you're going to go and find someone else. So from a retention perspective, it's terrible. Whereas if you just simply go and have a conversation, what we've found is that we've had actual interviewees say, this was really refreshing. It's been really nice to think about the relationship with this organization. And therefore they've walked away with a really positive impression, because suddenly they were reminded of all the great things. They got off their chest, they got all the bad stuff out, talked about it, knew that we were absolutely actually recording it, taking notes, and they knew it was going to go back in a structured manner. And so they felt much better about the relationship with the client. And if you do that on a regular basis and actually take the time to talk to them, you're probably actually, it's probably in a sense part of that customer experience of just saying, I value what you have to say. I want it to be part of our decision making. Please tell me more of what you think. And the client usually are going to respond really well to that. Not everyone, obviously some people are a bit busy, etc. But by and large, if you go and ask, people are willing to help. It's quite normal. I think the key to that, like following on from that, is what you do with it. Yes. Because so many times it's like we get all this feedback from our clients. Our clients give us loads of feedback, constructive and positive. But when you don't make the changes that your clients are asking for, that
invokes another sense of mistrust, because they've given all this information and you sit on it and they're like, oh, I gave that insight. And they potentially will continue working. They might be halfway through a project. They might be someone that you've worked with in the past and you potentially could look to do new business with them. Actually, knowing this from a client's perspective is I gave all this feedback and I know how valuable it is to their business, but I just don't feel that they've actually listened to me because they're not actually taking action on it. And I think that's a really big part of it, is like, how can we use that insight to take the right action to make good developments, albeit there is probably some feedback that is given, or some elements of feedback that's given that doesn't quite give us any insight. They're just talking. And I've had it before where I was doing some stakeholder interviews and they just rambled and complained for a good half an hour, which is okay, but it's our job as the viewer and the researcher to be able to dig deeper in and think, why are they actually saying that? Like, what's around that? And where is actually the insight in that? Because that might, on surface level, that might say nothing and it might not give, and they're just looking for something. But if we can, and I usually listen back at least 4 or 5 times, maybe more, to the same piece of information before I find out what the actual development is or the actual constructive feedback is that they're giving, and then the business is more likely to be able to implement something that they're going to come back to, and they're going to say, we heard you, we thank you, and the client feels, like you said, that relationship is stronger, it's a breath of fresh air, but also that loyalty and that trust with the business is then increased.
But you make a good point about what happens next, because we're in a sort of a nice position where we can go and talk to lots of people and come back with, it is strategy. Like we say, here are the different things and here are clearly directions that you need to take. But again, it's then over to the business, our client, to work through that. We can work with them, but you're in that position where you can actually look at all this information. As you said, you've got clients who may have said loads of great things, and then when they don't see it implemented, they complain. But you've got to make that tough choice of recommended to your client. Which ones you've got to pick and choose. You can't do everything.
No.
So how do you take all that insight that you do or that someone else like us might do? And how do you decide what's important for your clients and what they should be doing next?
It's really interesting. So I think because you've got, and a lot of the work that I start off with making sure I understand the business itself, like understand the business, understand the clients. I don't do any research until we've actually physically mapped out a service journey. Like really get down to, okay, how are we actually going to deliver this? And we identify from the business and the team's perspective is, what did they feel the gaps are? Where did they feel the optimizations are? And then we look at the data to be able to support that. And then from then you go into the client interview. So you've got your founder, you've got the stakeholders internally, then you're looking at the external stakeholders, and we're getting feedback from them. And it's bringing it all together to find common patterns and similarities. And that's where I come in to go, okay, what are both of them saying? And what is the data telling me? And is there anything between all three that marries together to go, okay, and this is something that has been expressed very urgently. Often the client looks at everything from their perspective and the business looks at everything from their perspective. So I've got to find like what's common between both of them and what's a priority. And it's looking at, okay, based off what the business's availability is, based off what their capacity is, based off what their resource is, let's have a look as to what needs to change, when are they able to do it, and who have they got to support with that process, and who's the right person to support with that process, and then how are we going to measure that? And based on that, I can do that over 3, 6, and 12 months. And I actually map out with them, what is this plan? And then keep them accountable through that process so that they then feel that they have someone to go, I know that Bella's going to check in with me the end of this month. So we've actually already said that we need to put these things in place. And then it comes to another round, potentially a year later, of customer interviews to see what the difference has been. And you can often check with the data as to what the difference has been. Because there's usually differences. If they've saved a load of money, their services are more profitable, their meeting timeline, everything's smooth. Team members feel more heard. They feel like they can follow a process easier. They can onboard new team members a lot easier and quicker because there's something for them to follow. But also then that makes a knock-on effect then for their customers and their clients' success, because retention's increased, or they have generated extra revenue through new opportunities with existing clients because they've been able to upsell and then that then from the insight, then we can develop new areas on new business, so updating messaging, etc. But you've got to find out, like taking it back a step is like, what are the priorities first? What are often the smallest things that are going to make the biggest difference that take no time at all to implement? Yeah. And then what are some of those bigger projects that we can understand where you have the capacity to start working on those?
What about in terms of, well, what I'm thinking is that I'm interested in seeing your perspective, because I've seen this when we do the research. Not every organization who does what you do necessarily goes and talks to customers. They just dip into the internal knowledge. Have you found that it's easier bringing to the table the voice of the customer? Have you found that it's much easier to, I suppose, fight back against internal bias when people are saying, well, yeah, my team say this, but actually I think this is more important and therefore we have to go that way? Do you find that when you bring the customer's voice to the table, it's easier to make them really understand that actually, no, they might be quite fundamentally wrong and that what they should be doing is something completely different?
Like I'd said before, there was a client that I was working with where they thought that the customer's really happy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But actually that client was like, I wouldn't work with them ever again.
Wow.
And those stark differences go to show, and they were like, well, we didn't know that. We just had the signs and the indicators that they were extremely happy.
Yeah.
And they'd probably work with us again. But then when it came to the client, they said that there was no communication. There was a real lack of structure, and they could tell that there was a lack of structure. They would ask for things and they weren't getting any response from the team in enough time. Sometimes it would take 3 days, sometimes it would take 5 days. And actually, when I went and looked to map their customer journey, I could see that, okay, well, how's your communication? How often are you sending emails out? What's your response time? And often they're not tracking any of this. So it's looking at, okay, let's map it. Let's have a look, and I'll review everything that you've got internally, and let's see what's going on inside. And when you start to lift the lid, skeletons do come out. But then when you speak to the founder about that, they may not be 100% comfortable with that feedback, but me bringing it in makes it a lot easier because it's not coming directly from the customer.
Yeah.
When it comes directly from the customer, it's often such a hard hit because you've grown this business. It's in essence your baby, and it's a lot easier to manage the quality when you're smaller. But when you start to hand that responsibility over to your team members, it's a lot harder to be able to do that. And that's where some of the clients that come to me is because the founder wants to take a step back from the day-to-day of client work and delivery, but they're really afraid of that quality being missed. And it comes back to, okay, well, let's see what the essence of what you do right now. Let's map it out. Let's understand it. Let's see what this high-level process is and who you potentially have to be able to fill those gaps. What responsibility can you give to the people that you've got? But what do the clients say? Let's make some final tweaks before you start to do that. And it's going to be a process. I worked for an agency and I did that. I helped the founder that I was working for. I helped her be able to take a step out of the day-to-day to work on the business. And by no means was it a short process. I mean, it took us, I think, up to 6 months for me to start taking control of client meetings, because it was her first leading them, me listening, us having a conversation afterwards, then me taking on for little parts of it. And then the clients at first were really resistant to that. But actually really including the clients in the process, getting their insight, getting their feedback meant that that process became a hell of a lot easier. And they were then confident that there was someone else taking over the process that wasn't the founder. And they were still very happy with that. And that didn't detract from their experience with the business because they were interacting with someone different.
I think that the founder, it's really helpful for a founder who wants to step away to actually doing that talking to their customers to actually realize that, no, actually things are okay.
Yeah.
Because I think you need to also see that I think we're so, engrossed in the process and the day-to-day. And as you say, that quality, even we've had that we're saying, well, how can we possibly find someone who can do the research like we do? Well, actually, there's probably people who can do it better. Yeah. And first you have to have that mindset. But I find that when you go and ask and, as I said, validate by having those conversations or just asking your clients what they think, and they say, no, yeah, it's okay. And you've heard it from a third party as well, so that it gets more honest. Or sometimes hearing, no, it's terrible, and therefore we need to make sure that it's right before we go ahead. I feel that again, is a really, it's a powerful tool to have that information, to be able to say, right, now my organization is ready, it's grown, and it's matured enough to move forward. And also, I would argue that as long as that process of continuing to get more and more feedback as part of the culture of the business, then that's a really great way to know that your business is always going to keep an ear out for the needs, the wants, and the pain points of all the stakeholders down the value chain, and make sure that every time there's a problem, it's fixed. Every time there's an opportunity, it's addressed, that nothing is missed, either positive or negative.
Yeah, I mean, it gives you an opportunity to be more proactive about it as well, because you can start to identify, once you understand some of this insight, and from my perspective, when you map it out, you can go, okay, well, what are the potential challenges that we generally come across with clients? And you start to see these common patterns and similarities come together, and it's like, okay, let's put in place something here, whether that's upfront within the first phase of this project, or we need to make sure on a monthly basis now that we're reaching out and doing this.
Yeah.
So you're looking proactively. Now, it may not make too much of a difference to the clients right now, but for future clients that you're on board, it's going to be so much easier, because it is always easier to implement change with new clients versus existing clients. But it's the existing clients often that help feed that change for newer clients.
Absolutely. And there's no reason why you can't have improved the experience of both, because your old clients might say you're changing, but it was better before. And you know that as an organization, you need to change and do things better because you're maybe not servicing the right clients.
Yeah.
But you can also create a whole custom experience for the existing or maybe old clients and see if they are ready to move into that new profile, or if actually it's much better naturally to move away and help them find someone who's better suited. Why not help them like that? You don't have to hang on to everyone, but you don't also have to just drop them and just leave them, hanging dry. You can actually help them with that. So again, looking at those different user journeys, custom experiences, there are a lot of them.
Yes.
And I think that it's important to know, to be aware of all of them. And again, coming back to focus is knowing which ones to tackle, which ones are important.
Yeah.
But also not just saying, right, we're going that direction and we're just forgetting everything. That I think is quite dangerous. And again, having a pulse on what people think and what they are experiencing really helps in that process as well. It just reassures everyone, from being heard from the staff's perspective to being heard by the customer's perspective. Yeah. Telling them that you're going to change is great. You don't have to hide it from them.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point there, and it leads quite nicely into something that I've been thinking about the difference between the UX and what we see. The customer experience is kind of the whole journey, but is that upfront, like, user experience in the front end versus like in delivery, and they're very much intertwined. And I think you've got to, from my perspective, you've got to understand the whole thing, not just see them as two separate components, because often everyone focuses, and a lot of clients that I speak to is just like, we've got to solve our marketing. Like, our marketing, we've got to get new clients in the door. But then when they get new clients in the door, they can't keep them because the experience that a client has, and from your perspective, is that user has throughout their entire journey, is not consistent. They're seeing it in separate sections, whether it comes through sales to the client services team to delivery team, and then so on and so forth. There's no consistency in it. So everyone needs to be, from a team's perspective, on the same page, but also what we're communicating through our messaging has to convey the experience that they're likely to receive afterwards.
Yes, no, absolutely. And it has to be really consistent everywhere, because we as users, as customers, we're intuitively, we again, it's an emotional thing. User experience and customer experience is quite emotional because it's based on human beings. It's not machines talking to machines. And you're experiencing something and you can feel it when something's wrong. So, you go through, let's say, even like booking a car for going on holiday, and that process is seamless. Then you arrive at the desk and suddenly it's full of problems, and you have a terrible experience, where you're going to go back and think about the whole user experience and therefore customer experience as being terrible, which is maybe not quite right, because maybe the website you booked is an aggregator and they've got a great thing, but actually they've not got no control on that. So you need to really understand the whole user experience, everything from clicking around on buttons on the website, to having a person at the desk talking to you, to even just the way that you open the box or with the keys in it or something like that. It's all 100%. Important things. Some are more important than others, obviously, and that's where you have to discriminate between them and know what to focus on. But only when you understand the whole user journey, the whole user experience, can you deliver great customer experience.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about going to a 5-star hotel, like, my background originally is in private travel and hospitality, and working on yachts in the south of France, over 60, 70 meters. So your clients are looking at the multi-billions.
Yeah.
And from that perspective, they have a certain level of expectation, but they have certain needs and wants that they have that we have to, and they see a seamless experience. It's like above the deck. It's like the ice, the tip of the iceberg. They see the tip of the iceberg. The 90% below the iceberg is all the workings out that we do to ensure we understand every inch of that person, where they are on the boat at any time, what their interests are, where they're traveling from, what even suitcases they have. And as a, like within that service, I mean, the pieces of paper in terms of organization that I remember of just going back and saying, okay, this person's mother is this name, their dad is this name, they have brown hair, they have this. And the characteristics aren't so important, but they hate peanuts, they love this. They really hate food around this. They love going to these types of destinations. They really like this type of pillow. They hate these type of smells. And I know from like friends and guests, and we always go back to this experience at the Four Seasons, is the amount of detail that you need to have on a person or your client, in essence, if it goes to a business sense, is it just helps you create something that's really personalized towards them.
Yeah.
So that when they come, they see that tip of the iceberg and it's seamless for them. Now, it's not 100%. There's always going to be variations. But for example, I was working on a boat and there was a guest that wanted a chocolate milkshake. And they wanted a chocolate milkshake like their mum made them.
Okay.
That was the only instruction I got. Like the only thing that they gave to me. There was nothing. There was no ingredients. And I went away and was like, okay, what flavors has he had in the past? Like, what does he like to eat around that? And we had a comprehensive understanding, but he'd never had a milkshake before. So then when I went in to create it, I think I'd chosen chocolate at the time and we'd put some banana in it. We'd actually crushed the ice and then blended it. And we made this really comprehensive smoothie, and it went out and he said, that was exactly like my mum made it, even better. I had no idea whether that was right or not. But it's the understanding that if I'd had that insight, I would have been able to meet and exceed his expectations with confidence versus guessing, working off assumption, and not having the right information to be able to give him that milkshake. And it translates back to business. Like if we have enough insight on our customers, not guessing whether it's the right service or the right level of communication, the right support, the right deliverable that we're giving them, we know with confidence that this is exactly what they need, exactly what they're looking for, and it's going to be the changing factor to give them success of what they're looking to achieve.
I agree. I would also add though that it's talking about your experience with the milkshake is that you actually had a personal interaction. Now, it could have been a complete fuck up. You could have been completely wrong and they would have hated it.
Yeah.
You got it right, which was lucky. Whereas if you'd gone through that process of understanding what they'd allowed you, obviously, then it would have been less hit and miss, which is the point that you're making. But also, I think it's really important nowadays. We've grown up as businesses in a digital world where everything is a data point, and it's a bit of like the it's obviously the gold rush. You get all this data and you can turn that into insights, and it becomes you create these user experiences that work for the millions.
Yeah.
But what I'm seeing with clients coming to us is that they are finding that their customers are starting to want something more personalized.
Yeah.
And again, yes, there is personalization in automated ways, etc. But what they really want, what they're really craving, is a deeper understanding of who they are as human beings on an emotional level, and they want to interact with that brand in a more personal manner. Now, don't get me wrong, you can't do that for millions of people. You do have to find certain common touch points, but there is no reason why as an organization you cannot go and talk to a sample of people on a regular basis or bake it into the way that your customer facing team are always asking questions and capturing that feedback to start getting a sense of where those much more human interactions are common across all your customers, and use that to create an incredible customer experience. That is far better than just saying 50% of people like this and 50% of people like that, so we'll just create two different things and see what happens. I think that is a very, very dangerous game to play. It does work for certain organizations, but if you're really focused on and committed to creating a great customer experience, you've got to understand the user experience, and to do that you've got to actually have conversations and really ask people the why. Why do they like this? Why do they like it? Not just what. Yeah.
The why will help you dig that extra layer deeper to be able to understand their wants and fears and desires, not just on a surface level. So there's one question I always ask when I get a lot of feedback. It's like, how would you articulate the transformation? So not just on a physical level of what you've been able to achieve, but what have you implemented and what physically has the difference been for your business, but also for you as an individual? And sometimes they can articulate it as it's just sometimes the descriptive nature of it actually really helps articulate what that emotional buyer is for somebody, but also the journey that they go throughout the different services and things that might have happened around that as well. Like walking away from this, even if someone was walking away from this, it's like take 30 minutes, an hour with your team and actually do like a profile on all your customers right now. And how much information do you have about them as individuals that would help your service? Or even just jump on a call with them and say, hey, like, how's business been? Or, well, you know, what have you been up to around business? Like, even just getting to them on that level can bring some personal insights, because then you've got your eye on not just them, but their clients, their industry, and you can bring more opportunities and insights, which you as a business you come across as more strategic, more insightful, and actually it develops that layer of trust even further.
Massively. No, I agree. So on the practical level, so we've been talking about obviously doing this insight stuff, this work of actually talking to people. Yeah. But how do you ask the right questions? How do you even know where to start? What is the right question for one client, and what is the right question for another?
So I think, like we touched on earlier, it starts off with knowing what you're looking for, really understanding where are the potential gaps. So for example, if you are looking for insight on your messaging, you're looking for insight on how we're bringing clients in, you can start to identify questions around when you came on, like when you were looking to come on board and you were looking to invest in this, what were you expecting? Like, what type of service were you expecting? Or what was that trigger to make you come on board? Like, when did you realize it was the right time? Or what was it that made you say yes? So asking questions like that, you can't start to identify what is the messaging around that you've said that made them jump on. But you've got to marry that into how would you articulate the results that you've got through this process? How could you articulate the transformation, and what was it that stood out for the business? So then you're starting to get different points of like, what makes this business unique? What's that differentiator for the business? And that gives the business insight into upfront, like what type of language that they need to be saying on a regular basis to attract that similar type of customer. And I think it's so clear to know, is this client that you're asking an ideal client, as well as all the other stakeholders. So how are the team communicating this? So you're asking them similar questions, but it's asking from a team's perspective, what would you say is the message for the business? How would you position the business to a client? And if their positioning is so stark differences between everybody, then there's a misalignment there. And if the clients come back with something completely different, then there's no consistency. So it's really, and it ties back to is like understanding what you're looking for. Like, what is it that you're trying to develop? And if you don't know that, it's looking at like, what are those data points that we can find, whether it's something that a client said that's a negative piece of feedback, and maybe a team member's left, or a client's left and you didn't know why, or it could be that you're getting the wrong type of clients coming in, or that your marketing's not hitting in general. There could be something there that you've not got enough insight into your clients, or if it's coming into your internal experience where you might not be making money from any of your services, and you're like, I just don't know where those gaps where are we spending too much time that we shouldn't be? Why are we kind of going back and making all these iterations and changes to different deliverables? We've got so many different clients that are coming back to us and saying this is not quite right. That might be a sign that there's something. Get a whole list of questions together, like so many questions, and then start to identify the key ones that can dig deep, and then go, why is that happening? Like, what were you looking for that wasn't there? And that can help give more insight as to the differences. Like, got to see a contrast between that as well.
Well, I think that's really interesting, because the example you use is a really good one about the nuance as well of those questions. So when you ask, let's say you ask a team member, what do you think the value proposition of the business is? To me, what we're asking is actually, tell me if you've understood what the value proposition of the business is. And therefore, are you, as you said, if they will give you a different answer, then you're pretty clearly seeing that the organization as a whole has not established a value proposition, even internally. So God forbid what it would be externally, or the understanding of it. But then if you ask the question slightly differently as to what is the value proposition to you in this business, that gives you a whole different story, because then they'll go into, well, they'll probably answer the first question already naturally, well, I've been told it's this, but actually from what I'm doing, I can see that the value proposition from my perspective and what I do is really this. And then when you start asking that question to lots of different departments, either you can, hopefully you don't just see complete dissonance everywhere, but you start seeing more hopefully patterns where people are saying, yes, in my world, because it's important to recognize that people are in their world within an organization, especially larger ones, but even small ones. And you start seeing that actually there's some really incredible insight around what the value proposition could be. And that's what we've done with it was a Scottish firm that used to be, it's 50 years old, and it used to be known as a roof and render company, which means they make the walls nice and the roof airtight, or if you like, or watertight. But they've transitioned over the years into being an energy efficiency contractor. Yeah. But internally, they were still seeing themselves as a roof and render. But if you went and spoke to them, and if you asked them, what do you think we are, roof and render? And then you talk to them about what they do, they would actually be saying it in different ways. Yeah. Well, we're actually making these buildings much more energy efficient. What I was doing the other day, I was actually putting insulation on the wall, which means that little granny now is much warmer. And so you're suddenly getting the value proposition and even the messaging coming from the teams quite naturally. And that, again, is really powerful. It's a nuance of how you ask those questions. And coming back to what I said earlier about maybe ask a question 3 times in a slightly different way, might give you 3 different answers that you then, as the expert researcher strategist, can then decide, well, I can see that this is definitely clearly for our value proposition work, but I've got this really incredible stuff that I can also provide to my client about cultural fit, depending on the different locations of the business, etc. So there's so much you can do with it. So asking the right question for me is actually, I don't think you can ask the right question. You have to know how to ask different questions and understand how to interpret when you're saying that. You look at the answers and decide what you make out of that.
100%. I know that, like, more so now, I get a structure from the business as to what they're looking for when we identify that together. And there's a couple of questions. I'm like, is there anything that you would specifically like me to ask?
Yes.
But I ask it in loads of different ways, and I never ask the same. I ask the same question twice because I'm looking for a certain answer. Yeah. But I'm not delivering it ever in the same way because everybody's different. They understand. They learn differently. So for one person, if I was to talk on a more descriptive level, and this goes down to a client interview I'd done recently, actually, and one client said, he's like, I'm not very emotional, I'm very logical, and I'm very practical. I don't quite understand what's being asked of me. Can you put an emotion or a feeling to that? He was like, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, describe it to me in a practical sense. Like, if I was to rephrase this question and I was to say it in this way, and he described so many feelings in that, but his brain couldn't quite understand the word, like, if I'm asking you to get a feeling to it. So it just goes to show that we have to adapt the questions that we're asking. And that generally, from the work that I know you do and I do, it comes from just experience of asking a lot of these questions 100%. And finding new ways of doing it. And that's where having someone often externally doing these questions for you gives you an insight, because it's not as structured, but you're still getting the same results and the same outcomes because you've got that expertise there, versus having a follow structure every single time. And leads very nicely onto my next question. I'm really excited to get your perspective on this, is that it's not structured, it's not rigid, and you're not just getting cookie cutter responses that don't give you any insight. Yeah. And from that, what's your perspective on surveys in Insight?
I'm very biased on these ones. So I want to say I hate surveys because I think that they are not used in the right way at all. Yeah. But conversely, I think they're really important, but not where and when we use them. Yeah. So again, it's actually our perspective. I'm sure that you probably agree with this, but surveys are a very, very safe way to ask questions. You don't have to face a person, and also you get the answers to the questions you want to ask. So it's win-win for the person who's in charge of it. Yeah. But it's not win-win for the organization, because you're not probably getting the answers to questions you didn't know what to ask. Yeah. So for me, that's why it's so important to do qualitative user research first, and then know, again, helping focus and focus and focus as to where you're supposed to go. Your interviewees are probably asking you or giving you the questions that you're supposed to ask, and then you can use that to go and make a survey.
I think it's really interesting what you say about surveys and how, like, what order to put them in, which is not actually something that I'd quite thought about, but it's interesting because I speak to a lot of people that already use surveys, and there's a really interesting ways that people can. My instinct was always completely against surveys, but if you're speaking to people in volume generally and your audience are in volume, there's no other way. You can't go on a call with every single one of them. Now, you can do group focuses for sure. That's sometimes a way to do it, but I think surveys can give you a really valuable insight on a scale as well, and you get some really good quantitative data from them. But from that, there are some really interesting automations that you can do that if they mark a certain number, for example, on a scale of 1 to 10, if they marked 5 or more or 5 or below, let's say, that you would ask them for more insight in a certain way. So you can then provide a follow-up question to ask them to elaborate on that from both perspectives as well, whether it's a positive or or from a slightly more constructive perspective. But then you can also, if there's more insight, you can actually, if it's a client that is a loyal client, often you can ask them if they would like to jump on a conversation post this to give you more insight as to their experience as well as. And I think that's where surveys can actually also be a very good starting point to develop. But like you said, is you've got to understand what the right questions you are that you're asking first. And you've got to have that focus in the survey to be able to ensure that you're extracting the right data at that point, to be able to then develop the conversation to actually make it that more focused, to expand on why they picked the certain answer they did in that survey. So my perception has slightly changed of, I think they can be beneficial, but they've got to be used in the right way to be able to get the answers that you're looking for. Otherwise, the chances are, and it's so sad that I see this with so many businesses, is that the feedback that they get, and I see this in testimonials, is just so generic that it could be about anybody. It doesn't clearly articulate who the business is, why they came to them in the first place, what made them different, what results they got, what the actual transformation was, what they've implemented, and then the ongoing effect of working with them. And I see that with all testimonials, is they take them at the end of their engagement, but actually it's often that's not when you get the results. It's when are we extracting that information? Like, how do we understand when those touch points need to be throughout our customer experience to be able to get the most accurate information from the client or the stakeholder? And this can be from team members at certain points of the project, because that's when the information's fresh.
Yeah.
Often when we conduct research or we conduct insight, there is an element of variables that people don't often remember that information. And that's where using different types of research and insight, that we have to use multiple to be able to, like you said, validate what we're looking for.
Yeah, I think in that case, what I'd add or change from my statement is that what I dislike is the way that surveys are being misused.
Yeah.
They are probably seen as being, again, this quick win, cheap option of getting feedback and therefore hitting the demand of having some feedback. Whereas what you're saying is that surveys, they can become very, very complex, and they should be. So the underlying mechanism can be really, really sophisticated, but delivering a survey with a great user experience that delivers the insights that you actually need. I'll still maintain that a bit of qualitative user research first helps you build a better survey.
Yeah.
But what you're saying is really important. Don't just assume that a survey is putting questions 1 to 10 and hoping that you're going to get great stuff. You're not. You're going to get some very shallow insights. So use surveys as they're supposed to be and be more sophisticated about them.
Yeah, even if you were to ask that question on a scale of 1 to 10, I know people do it to try and understand a quantitative, like, subjective opinion on potentially how someone's feeling if they were a mindset or a life coach or something like that. You've got to ask these questions on a gauge of feeling. It's like, okay, well, what's beneath that? Because that on a scale of 1 to 10 is a subjective perspective. It doesn't give you that much insight. I think if someone's walking away from this or is watching this session, listening to it, reading anything about it, is that if you're going to walk away from this, take 30 minutes, have a look at your clients and have a look at the potential gaps that you see. So take some time to understand what you feel those gaps are and try and formulate some questions that are geared to what it is that you're looking to investigate. And I think from that perspective, you're more likely to ask the right questions and get the insight that you're looking for. But I wouldn't, if you're getting information, don't sit on it. And I think that's my biggest thing, is find a way to be able to find common patterns and similarities in the information that you're getting, and have a look at what is the biggest thing that someone is saying that's going to make a big difference to our customer experience or our user experience or our profitability or our customer acquisition. Like, what's going to make the biggest difference, not just from our perspective, but bring other people into the process to use that information to make change.
Yeah. And I'd add to that as well is look out for the stories that people tell you. They're really powerful. As human beings, what we remember is stories. We don't necessarily remember figures and numbers. And figures and numbers are really important for the business itself, for operating. But actually, the stories is what delivers the most interesting insights that you can possibly find, and you can actually use them in your marketing. You can use them for developing your value proposition, etc., etc., etc. It's really useful. So again, having that ability to go much deeper in the insights brings you a lot more value. One thing I wanted to add as well is to come back to the traditional UX of websites. And you still need to do user research there as well. But what I'd recommend is don't ask questions about, what should you be doing? Where should you be clicking next? Again, it has its place, but it's probably not where you think it is. Talk about what people want and what they need from a website like that. Talk about what they need from a service like that. And then let the UX designer or the UX team then interpret what that means in terms of user journeys and button placements. Don't ask them about that. They're not the experts in that. What they're experts at is in what they know and what they need and what they want and what their pain points are. So focus on that.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's just, I would always say it's just try not to think about this too complex. At the end of the day, it's not a cost to your business. It's an investment into the development of your business. Like, think of the benefits that we can, once we have this insight, we can make optimizations to our marketing, our messaging, our proposition to get more clients and make sure that we're getting the right clients that we want to work with. It can help us to make sure that we're aligned to the services that we're offering, so that we're developing them, but also so we're developing them in line with the business goals. If we're looking to grow, how are we identifying opportunities for new business from our existing client base? How are we identifying opportunities for new services that we can offer our clients? But also, how can we identify areas that we can streamline, make it simple, that can allow us to scale easier, but also give us time, retain our team, and just have more enjoyment kind of running into that business, but actually having it make money versus costing us money because we've not aligned our business and our services to our clients' needs. And I think it comes down to that, is like, it's an investment to save you money, not to cost you money to cost you money. And I think that's one of the things to take away from this. It's
an investment, not a cost. And also what I would add to that is that fundamentally what it is it's a cheat sheet. Why would you bother trying to do all the guesswork when you can go and ask them and they're willing to tell you? It's all there. And so that's why, again, it's much, much cheaper to do the research than try and guess something, get it wrong, realize you spent all that money on the wrong thing. Go and ask them. They're going to tell you.
Yeah, definitely. And if you want any more insights and you'd like to hear from us, Alex and I are doing drop-in sessions and clinics for you guys to be able to come with your challenges, ask any questions that you might have about your business specifically, or general questions that you have around asking the right questions, understanding how to develop your user experience, both from a front-end perspective, but developments to your customer experience, your operations, and the process in your way of working. We'll drop you through some more information about that.